2013 ESA webinar series. Today's topic is how to efficiently and effectively review a journal manuscript. Our speaker today is Dr. Raymond A. Cloyd, Professor and Extension Specialist in Horticulture Entomology and Integrated Pest Management, Department of Entomology at Kansas State University. Raymond has an extension and research appointment at Kansas State. His research and extension program involves pest management in greenhouses, nurseries, landscapes, turf grass, conservatories, interior scapes, Christmas trees, and fruits and vegetables. Raymond is the extension specialist in horticulture entomology for the state of Kansas with the major clientele that includes homeowners, master gardeners, and professional and commercial operators. Raymond has published over 70 scientific referred publications and over 400 trade journals on topics related to pest management. In addition, he has authored or co-authored numerous books like that of Pests and Diseases of Herbaceous Perennials, IPM for Gardeners, and Plant Protection, Managing Greenhouse Insect and Mite Pests. He's also published book chapters, manuals, or pocket guides, and extension-related publications. Raymond is a frequent speaker at state, national, and international conferences and seminars. He has received numerous awards and honors, including the American Society for Horticulture Sciences Outstanding Extension Educator Award 2012, and the 2011 Society of American Florists Alex Laurie Award for Research and Extensions, with others. The next voice you will hear will be that of Dr. Raymond Cloyd.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar, which is co-developed by the Entomological Society of America, entitled How to Efficiently and Effectively Review a Journal Manuscript. And I promise you, I will make this as exciting as possible. Before we begin this webinar, I'd like to go over the presentation, what you should expect to hear. I'll give you a brief introduction, talk about the manuscript submission and peer review process, decision to review, procedures associated with conducting an efficient and effective review of a journal manuscript, conducting a quality review, value of reviewing journal manuscripts, a summary, and then, of course, at the very end, questions and discussion. This webinar was developed based on over 10 years of my experience associated with reviewing scientific-based journal manuscripts and presently serving as subject editor for one of the ESA journals. The goals of my webinar today are to help young professors, assistant professors, to understand the process of the peer review and help them in an 11-step process to efficiently and effectively review manuscripts. This will also be helpful to professors or those finessing professors that might need a little bit more information on how to review manuscripts. First of all, the process of reviewing journal manuscripts should not be considered a dreadful and time-consuming experience. Most of the problems related is that people wait to the last minute to review the manuscript. And I know, and I'm in the academic field myself, that there's not a lot of credit given for reviewing manuscripts. In some cases, you can't even put these on evaluation forms. However, putting a positive spin on it, I would think of reviewing manuscripts as a challenge to understand what is happening out in the scientific literature. In general, reviewing journal manuscripts is a learn-by-doing experience or trial and error process. Everyone is different in how they approach the peer review process. It's the same as, or similar as trying to play an instrument. Practice, practice, practice. The more that you review, the better you will become in developing quality reviews and efficiently and effectively reviewing manuscripts. Again, it can be a very enjoyable learning experience if you know how to efficiently and effectively review journal manuscripts. Before that, I'd like to do some background associated with the submission process as demonstrated by this cartoon. The manuscript submission and peer review process involves a number of steps. The editor-in-chief, in this case, I'll be referring to the ESA journals that we have. The editor-in-chief of those receives all manuscripts submitted to a specific journal. Then the subject editor receives the appropriate manuscripts based on their expertise from the editor-in-chief. And then the manuscripts are screened by the subject editor We know today that reviewing manuscripts, of course, is difficult, and there's not very many people out there left. So the subject editor is designed to screen the ones that are valued for sending out for external review. So the appropriate manuscripts that are not withdrawn or initially rejected by the subject editor are then sent out for external review. And generally, there's a process trying to get about 3 external reviewers per manuscript. So you will be one of several that are out there doing the review process. Then, as an external reviewer, they send their comments and recommendation back to the subject editor. The subject editor then makes the final decision. That could be accept with minor revisions, accept with major revisions, or rejection of the manuscript. So first of all, why review a journal manuscript? Well, it's a professional responsibility. That is, we want to maintain the value of our journals and our research, and we want to make sure that our information is valued across the scientific and non-scientific communities. It also can enhance the critical thinking skills because as opposed to now basically writing a manuscript, now you're on the other end of reading it and trying to provide some critical constructive criticism. 3, improve understanding of the peer review process. This is really why this webinar was designed for assistant or young researchers to really have a handle of when they're asked to review a manuscript, what they need to do. Number 4, learn what research is being conducted in your field of study. This gives you the opportunity to learn what others, including your colleagues, are doing in your area of study. And the last one, improve writing and data presentation. I think I can use, David McCullough said it best. Reading and writing are calisthenics for the brain. I cannot tell you that by reviewing journal manuscripts, I have enhanced my writing and definitely my data presentation skills. So overall, this has enhanced the quality of some of my scientific journal manuscripts. So what is the role of a reviewer? Well, first of all, you determine whether a given manuscript merits publication. You are acting as a filter or screen, and you are extremely important to the subject editor in this entire process. Number 2 is provide constructive criticism for the authors. Don't indicate that the entire study needs to be redone, unless it has to, but provide constructive, useful criticism that the authors can use to enhance the quality of the manuscript if they can resubmit it. Okay, what will happen? You're sitting at your desk, you open your email, and you get, this is an example of a message that you may receive from editors or subject editors associated with the scientific journals to review a manuscript. And you can see the one here that was designated toward me. Okay, after the euphoria, and now you're up in heaven, come back down to earth, you need to ask yourself some questions that you need to address before deciding on whether to review a journal manuscript. First of all, is the manuscript appropriate for the designated journal? Well, how do you determine that? Well, you can go to that journal and look at the table of contents or look at the types of papers that have been published. Number 2, do I have the expertise to conduct a quality review? If you're in the area of field entomology and you get one on molecular biology, that may be one you want to pass on because you will not feel comfortable and you will not be able to conduct a quality review. Pick the ones that you have the likelihood of success in providing a quality review based on your expertise. Number 3, do I have the time to devote to review and complete the review by the requested date? This is imperative. If you cannot devote the time to review it, then indicate so to the subject editor or whoever contacted you. Number 4, do I have any conflicts of interest? And this will be repeated several times, associated with the manuscript that makes it difficult to perform unbiased judgments. If so, then decline the review request immediately. Let's go over some checklists for reviewers or areas of comments once you've decided to review a manuscript. First of all, the research question. How important is it? Is it relevant? And does it have utility? Number 2, is it original? Is it novel? Number 3, now number 3 is going to be discussed several times throughout this webinar because this is the core of all journal manuscripts. The strengths and weaknesses of the methodology, the experimental design, statistical approach, and interpretation of the results. In my experience, 90% of the journal manuscripts that fail to have these strengths in these areas result in rejection. Number 4, writing style and clarity. And I want to stop here to discuss one point. A lot of us may get journals or manuscripts that are written by people which English is not their primary language. That's not a problem. But if you're not able to conduct a clear, concise quality review because of issues with grammar, spelling, and the writing style, be sure to immediately send it back with a letter or email to the subject editor and editor regarding that concern. Every manuscript should have some type of internal review before it's actually submitted to the major journal that they want to have it published in. Number 5, presentation of figures and tables. Figures and tables should help to guide the reader through the results section. They should not be filled with extraneous information, and we will come back to this as we go through the webinar. Number 6 is the ethical concerns, animal, human, and conflicts of interest. So what, as a reviewer, are your responsibilities to the authors of the manuscript? Well, one of them is provide written, honest, and unbiased feedback in a timely manner, and I have to stress timely manner. When you agree to review a manuscript, do not delay it because you will form bottlenecks and make it more difficult for the subject editor. All authors want to know as soon as possible if their manuscript has been accepted for publication or has in fact been rejected. Number 2, provide a critical opinion of the manuscript as an expert in the field and in a collegial and constructive manner. That says it all. Number 3, comment on the writing style, especially clarity. And again, for those manuscripts that are written by scientists that English is a second language, you need to comment on it and send the subject editor or the editor-in-chief your concerns regarding that. You're not English professors. You're not supposed to go through the grammar thoroughly. And so that has to be done by the authors of the manuscripts, and that can occur through several types of internal reviews. Number 4, again, rate the detail, the methodology, the relevance, accuracy, and the originality of the study. Number 5, avoid personal comments and criticisms. You are reviewing the manuscript, not the authors. Number 6, maintain professionalism and confidentiality, particularly given our competitive nature of research, funding availability, and publication pressure. Number 7, never directly contact the author or authors without permission from the editor unless the journal indicates otherwise, and be very sure about that. Okay, what are your responsibilities to the editor? Once you've, of course, you've been assigned the manuscript, you've accepted it, what about your responsibilities to the editors? Well, always respond promptly to editors if unable to review a manuscript. Don't wait more than 1 day because, again, if you wait and wait, this creates a bottleneck in the system. If you can't do it based on some of the factors we've already talked about, let them know immediately. They will very much appreciate that. If you're not able to do a review, it is also advisable to submit names of individuals or experts that could be potential reviewers. And number 3 is assess the scientific merit of the submission with recommendations for either acceptance or rejection. Number 4, mention potential ethical concerns associated with the manuscript regarding research methodologies or similarities with other papers or current ongoing research. I know we are in a publish and perish nature, but we really have to be sure that we maintain our ethics over everything else. Number 5, be sure to acknowledge personnel and or author conflicts of interest and inform the editor of these issues immediately. Okay, now what I'm going to be presenting in the next 3 images are what you will see as a reviewer for the Entomological Society Rapid Review System. And there are 15 of these. Number 1 is the manuscript appropriate to the field of the journal? And this is similar to what I discussed before, where you can go back to the table of contents or look at the journal and look at those papers that have been published. Number 2, Has the material been published previously, or is it being considered for publication elsewhere? That might be difficult for you to ascertain at this point. Number 3, does the abstract provide a specific representation of the article? An abstract is kind of the cliff notes of the manuscript. It should designate why, how the study was done, and also highlighting the definitive conclusions. If it's not standalone, that may be something you have to address in your review. Number 4, are the methods clearly described? Remember, the materials and methods are like a cookbook where you can go back, follow exactly what the author did, and get similar results. If that can't be accomplished, you may want to make note of that. Number 5, is the work preliminary, inconclusive, or superficial? Number 6, do the data justify the conclusions? That's pretty much simple. If there's a lot of speculation or there's no data to back up conclusions, you need to make note of that. Number 7, I understand that not all of us are statisticians. However, in our progress of the academic system, we should have taken sufficient statistical courses to know the statistical methods that should be applied. Should it be repeated measures? Should non-parametrics be used? If you have trouble with that, just go back and do a little bit of brief updates on some of the statistical methods. 90% of the journals that I reviewed in my course fail or are rejected because of inappropriate statistical methods. Number 8, if the authors cannot do any statistical analyses, should the manuscript be rejected? This is a judgment call, as of course science is based on analyzing the data, but it also depends on the story or what the manuscript is trying to present. Number 9, are there tables or figures that should be omitted or combined? If there's a table and there's no statistical significance among the treatments, possibly saying in 2 sentences in the text would eliminate the table. Remember, with page charges, you want to make sure that every page on that manuscript is valid. Also, sometimes you can combine figures and make them A, B, or C as opposed to separate figures. Number 10, are there any errors of fact calculation or interpretation? Number 11, are there any sections of the manuscript that should be omitted or condensed? I know that every manuscript that we write we think is basically the best thing there is out there. However, sometimes in the discussion section we can get a little bit wordy, and those are the sections that can be either condensed or there's sections that can be omitted. So the discussion section is where you focus anything related to omission or condensing of the information. Number 12, are the main points of the manuscript clear to one not in the author's field? This is why I try to review manuscripts that are really outside the entomological area, because I actually am serving as a reviewer that is not really affiliated with the studies. Number 13, is there enough general information to make it a valuable publication? That's a judgment call and something you may have to communicate with the subject editor or the editor-in-chief. 14, should the number of references be reduced? Again, that's a judgment call, but if in the introduction section, if the first sentence has 14 references, that may be justification to reduce it down to fewer than 14. 15, if this is a form section manuscript, does it meet the criteria for that section? So again, when you get into the rapid review system for the essay, these are the 15 questions that you will be asked. Okay, how to be a good reviewer? Well, the first thing is respond promptly and immediately to invitations to review. I say within the same day or the next day. The longer you wait, the more difficult it is for the subject editor to determine if you're going to review it or not. And if you cannot review it, then that allows them to make solicitations for other reviewers. Number 2, notify the editor of any conflicts of interest or previous reviews conducted on submitted manuscripts. This is what I call fishing expeditions. I've had instances in my experience where I've seen the same manuscript 3 times to different journals. And what you can do in that point, if you keep your comments or letters of explanation, you can just send for the subject editor and let them know that you've reviewed this manuscript previously. Number 3, you got to maintain confidentiality. That's pretty much spelled out there. 4, complete review on time. That's been mentioned already and why it's important. Number 5, Write a useful and quality review. When I get reviews back saying this manuscript is good as is, that doesn't provide much feedback to me. It's not very meaningful. And we'll discuss how you do develop a quality review as we go through the webinar. Provide comments to editor and the authors. Okay, are we ready to rock and roll? The next series are 11 steps in how to efficiently and effectively review a manuscript or conduct a quality review. Start early. Don't wait till the last minute or when the manuscript review is due. That's why it becomes a dreadful experience. Select the time you are most alert. I'm a morning person. My pistons are firing. The synapses are going back and forth. That's when I'm most likely to make a critical evaluation of the manuscript. If you're an evening person, then that's when you should probably devote your time to reviewing the manuscript. Schedule 1 to 2 hour blocks of time during the day to review a manuscript, and this can be done. What is very important is be sure to avoid any distractions when reviewing a manuscript, as this will interfere with performing a quality review. Don't try to take care of the dog and cat, the kids, text, use your iPod, smartphone at the same time you're reviewing a manuscript. You're not going to provide a quality review. In general, following these 11 steps, it should take you no more than 7 days to conduct a quality review. Number 2, what I recommend is performing a cursory review of the manuscript focusing on the materials and methods and the statistical analysis. If there are any problems with these sections, then this may compromise the validity of the entire manuscript. If there are problems with this section, then the results and discussion may not be valid. Make notes directly on a hard copy. This is what I do. I take hard copies, print them off. I can take them home with me. I can take them on travels. I can take them when I go to the bathroom, and I can make notes on them and then use that to develop the explanation letter later on. But if you just do a cursory review of the core of the manuscript, the materials and methods and statistical analysis, that's really the big first step. Okay, wait about a day or two, let things soak in, and then conduct a thorough quality review of the manuscript. Again, pay attention to or focus your attention on factors associated with the materials and methods and statistical analysis, including experimental design, number of replications, randomness of the data, how many years of a field study conducted, and number 5, statistical analysis. What model was used, what program was utilized, and what mean separation test was used. Once you've gone through this and the manuscript appears sound, then you can go to the results section, because the results section will be a reflection of how well the materials and methods and statistical analysis was conducted. So when you get to the results section and you read it, be sure to check all tables and figures for accuracy, and even if they're needed. Again, page charges are important. If you can say the same thing in 2 lines as opposed to a figure, I would recommend doing that. Also, make sure that the information represented in the text is valid. Furthermore, make sure figure legends and table captions are standalone. If you have to refer back to the manuscript text, then the tables are not standalone. You should be able to look at a table or figure and get all the information you need. Also, make sure that tables and figures are not too busy, and make recommendations like break up a figure into several figures, A, B, or C, or even tables also. Okay, number 5, afterward, after you've gone through the materials and methods, statistical analysis, and results, and the figures and tables, and those appear sound, go back and return to the introduction and discussion sections to determine if these sections include a clear, concise reason for conducting the study, including objectives and the knowledge gap addressed. Make sure the information in the discussion section is presented in regards to the current study and other studies. This allows you some useful information on how well the authors have evaluated the previous literature and incorporated it into their discussion section. And finally, how is the study going to move the silence forward? Remember, a manuscript is a story, and you're trying to get an idea of what the authors are trying to convey with the story. Number 6, Be sure that any conclusions stated by the authors are supported by their data. Many times in my reviews, there's a lot of speculative information that is not supported by data or is not supported by any type of citations. So make sure the authors provide conclusions, again, based on their data from their study. 7, make sure the abstract is able to stand alone from the manuscript and sufficient information is included. Remember, the manuscript is the cliff notes of the manuscript. It dictates why things are being done, what was done or how it was done, and then highlights the key findings of the study. If it's not standalone or it's missing information, you need to include that in your review. Number 8, review the references section and determine the following. An adequate number of citations have been included, something to think about. Important and current articles have been included. This is important as an expert in the area. If you think that some of your articles haven't been included or some of your colleagues have not been included, then that is something to bring up or address with the authors. Articles have not been misinterpreted by authors to support arguments or results. This is something we've had in our experience, previous research, where a journal or paper had been cited over and over again. My co-author and I looked at the paper and come to find out didn't even contain the information that had been cited all those years. This is the same thing as information transfer. What you tell person that is number A will be totally different by the time it gets down to person Z. Another factor to consider is making sure that the references are in the text and the references cited are also in the text. Go back and forth. And this is something you can do in the evening if you're a morning person like me. Number 9, after completing the review of a manuscript, develop a detailed explanation letter justifying your recommendation. That is, accept with minor revisions, accept with major revisions, or reject. It is important to be specific, which will assist the subject editor in making an appropriate final decision. In addition, be sure to submit a timely review. Number 10, what are some of the comments that you can present to the authors, and in what format? Well, there are 2 formats. You can use one or the other, or a combination. You can write your comments in paragraph form, highlighting the major strengths and weaknesses of the manuscript. Be specific in regards to all proposed comments and suggestions. Don't state that the statistical analysis has problems. Be specific on that matter. And then the second one is provide a detailed page-by-page listing for each section, introduction, materials and methods, results and discussion of suggestions and comments for improvement, or indicate major flaws associated with the study. I tend to do the second one because I think it helps the authors to quickly find out where the problems or the comments you have are found. But this will be based on everybody's comfortability level. Number 11, be sure your comments to the author are congruent with your recommendation to accept or reject the manuscript. Nothing is more frustrating than when the subject editor reads through it, everything looks fine, and you recommend rejection. If you recommend accept with major revisions, make sure that your recommendation reflects that, because it can make the process slow it down, and it makes the job of the subject editor a little bit more difficult. What are some of the comments that you should include? These are suggestions or proposed changes, requests for clarification, statements directing authors to change or correct something. Those are the primary ones, although not inclusive, that should be part of the review process. Okay, you're down to this point. You've done everything you can, and you're in the rapid review system, and you have these options. Accept with minor revisions, accept with optional revisions, reconsider after major revisions, or reject. Now, something else I want to add. I reminded you that I do usually hard copies and make comments on them. There is a place for you to upload additional comments or actually annotated versions of the manuscript. And these sometimes can be extremely helpful to the authors because they can find them rapidly, more so than sometimes reading the reviewer comments. So again, there's usually options in most journals that are out there for uploading additional folders, additional files, or additional comments. After you've done this, it's time to go out and have a beer and celebrate. Remember, someone took the time to review your journal manuscript, so in return, or reciprocity, you should spend the time and effort to perform a quality review. It is important to abide by the golden rule, review unto others as you would have them review unto you. I have to say that in developing this webinar, I have learned a lot myself and was able to access some very valuable publications which are presented on this image. Many of these come from the medical profession, and there can be overlap among these. However, I would recommend selecting a few of these and reading them. It will give you sort of an overview of what I've talked about and also some additional information. In summary, reviewing manuscripts is important in maintaining the integrity of scientific publications. We want to make sure that our ESA journals are well respected, have good impact factors, and are reliable. And it only occurs when you are a reviewer. I cannot tell you how important it is for reviewers out there that have helped me as a subject editor make decisions on manuscripts. Conducting an efficient and effective review of manuscripts is not difficult. I hope if you follow the 11 steps that I presented, it should not be a formidable exercise at all. Submitting a timely review is important. That's critical. When it says 3 weeks, don't go beyond that point because it puts the subject editor in a bind. Reviewing manuscripts may enhance critical thinking skills and provides an opportunity to learn what other researchers are doing. I think of this as a positive spin that, in my experience, I have learned tremendously over the years in reviewing manuscripts, which has enhanced my writing skills. And the more I do, the better I become as a reviewer and making quality reviews. And lastly, reviewing manuscripts is a professional responsibility. That's pretty much the way it is said. It is part of your job as a scientist to perform reviews on manuscripts during your tenure process. This webinar is not an individual effort. I have had assistance from a number of great people out there, and I want to acknowledge them. The first one is Richard Levine, Publications Assistant from the Entomological Society of America. Without a doubt, Pamela Reed, Manager, Marketing and Member Relations for the Entomological Society of America. And also John Trumbull, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Economic Entomology. Alan Cameron, Editor-in-Chief of Environmental Entomology. And Alan Kahn, Director of Communications and Publications for the Entomological Society of America. These individuals have been imperative and very important in helping me design an effective and efficient webinar on how to review journal manuscripts. I want to thank you all for your attention. I don't know what the numbers are, but I do want to thank you for attending this, and I hope you all learned something. And I hope that after this webinar, you'll be able to go back, rethink, and be able to efficiently and effectively review manuscripts and make it a fun, knowledgeable experience. If you're wondering who's talking, there's my photo on the upper left and right, and there's my contact information. So with that, I want to say thank you for your attention, and if we have any time, which I think we do, it's question time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cloyd, and yes, we do have several questions. So at this time, I'm going to ask if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the questions section, or you can click on the raise hand option, and I will be able to open your line and you can ask the presenter directly. But while everyone else is trying to figure out if they have questions, we have several individuals who have already posted questions. Your first question, Dr. Cloyd, is why does a reviewer of an ESA journal article not offered the option to select except with major revision?
That's a good question to make sure. I'm not really sure. Can you repeat the question, Pamela? I'm not making sure I understand it for one.
Okay, yes. Why does a reviewer of an ESA journal article not offer the option to select except with major revision?
I think that option is available, if I remember right. Yeah, that would be number 4. Reconsider after major revisions. But are they saying if they say except with major revisions? I think that's both the same. You might want to contact Alan Kahn associated with that.
Okay, we can definitely follow up with the person who's asking the question.
Good question too.
The next question is, how many years of field data are appropriate for consideration for publication in ESA journals?
Excellent question. In my experience, it's either going to be a minimum of 2 up to 3 years.
Okay, great. Your next question is, how do you handle references that are review articles?
Oh, that's an excellent question and one that I was going to bring up. If you look at the referencing section and one of the citations is from the Annual Review of Entomology, you may want to make a note of that because it's the actual source you're looking at, not the review article. And I've had that occur in several cases where when I've had to go back to the authors, I've had to let them know is you need to provide the actual source, not a review article or a published reviewed paper. Good question.
Okay. Another question is, how many hours does it usually take to complete a review following this process?
How many hours? Well, again, it should take no more than 7 days, but a couple of, it depends on the size of the manuscript. It depends on the type of study that was done. But if you're looking for a range of hours, it probably should take more than 8 to 10 hours to do a quality review.
Okay.
And that's based on my experience, though.
This is a comment and a question.
Okay.
There is a growing trend toward open peer review these days. A number of journals now give the option for reviewers to reveal themselves, and with some journals that is mandatory. In these cases, the reviews are generally published alongside the accepted paper. What are your thoughts in this trend?
Very good question. My thoughts are based on maintaining the integrity of our science. I think a manuscript should only be published or presented when it has gone through the review process totally, and I am not one to recommend allowing the reviewers' names to be divulged. I think that's part of the process of reviewing is it's a confidential and anonymous task.
Okay. What qualifies as a conflict?
Excuse me?
What qualifies as a conflict?
Oh, good question. Well, one of them would be if, for example, your graduate student is now working for a university and they're trying to publish part of their dissertation, and they put you down as a reviewer, that might be a conflict of interest right there. Another person that you've worked with on grants or previous manuscripts very closely, that might be a conflict of interest there. Or someone you're working on a grant right now that is trying to present some of their previous research.
Okay. Someone is requesting for you to go back to the slide, or can you show the list of the other resources for review guidance?
Absolutely. There it is.
And also
These were just 6 of many I looked at, but I selected these 6 because they were in the science area, and they really had a couple of key points. There was some redundancy, but each one of them has some really good key points regarding how to really review a journal manuscript. And you see a lot of those are associated with the medical profession. But the information is applicable for reviewing ESA journals.
Okay, thank you. The next question, this individual states, I've been invited to review some manuscripts, but I've never published in any of the journals. I reviewed manuscripts for. What I would like to know is how does a person get invited to review an article?
That's a really good question. It goes back to the one point that I made where a colleague of yours has recommended you as a reviewer. But in the ESA process, the subject editors have a listing of individuals for major categories that they can select. As an ESA member, you're in a database. And for example, if I get a journal article on bees, I can go in and type or highlight apiculture, and it'll pull up all the scientists that are out there, that ESA members that could be potential reviewers are on that list. And not just ESA, but other journals have databases where they have individuals that they would solicit as reviewers based on your expertise.
Great. Your next question is it okay to use track changes in the reviews?
That's another good question, and I say yes. I tend to write on the manuscript, but you can do track changes and then save it, and then when there's that option to upload, you can upload the version with the track changes. So I'm okay with that.
Great. What would you qualify as major versus minor revisions, and can you give some examples?
Okay, let me go back to this. That's a good question. Okay. Minor revisions would be ones where it's either grammatical or there needs to be like clarification. For example, if the reviewer cannot understand a certain step or process in the materials and methods, that would be one. A major revision requires maybe some modifications to the materials and methods, maybe redoing it, the statistical analysis differently, maybe presenting your information differently. I think the one that really, excuse me, showed up to me was for a major revision where they used the wrong statistical analysis. However, the rest of it was pretty good. So if they still had the data and they ran a different statistical analysis, it wouldn't change the overall result in discussion, but it would make it a better, valid, and more robust manuscript.
Very good. Your next question. If the author did not do statistical analysis in data set, it is an appropriate reason to reject the manuscript?
Very good question, and it really depends on the manuscript. Of course, in a review article, that would be okay because there's no statistics, but you'd have to look at the study and ask yourself, would it benefit from statistical analysis? And if it would, then that may justify rejection because of it. But it's going to be a case-by-case basis. If they presented the information, the story's being told is relevant, it's concise, and is justified as importance without the statistical analysis, then that may be enough reasoning to say, okay, it's okay and may not have to reject it.
Well, we have some very enthusiastic participants because we have several questions, so I'm going to try to get through most of these questions.
Okay.
If co-authors cited their own papers, how many should be okay? Is there a limit, or they can cite as many as study of their own as well as other papers?
That's a good question. Well, I wouldn't make the entire references section your own. I would definitely break it up. I would say, and again, I really can't give a definitive number, but in my own experience, I try to limit it to no more than 5 of my own. If you get 12 or above, you may have an ego problem or something, but I don't think you need to go more than that.
Okay, great. We actually have someone who has raised their hand. Esther.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can. Go ahead. You feel free to ask your question.
Okay, I was just wondering how many references should actually are considered the minimum amount for a manuscript?
Make sure I understand your question. After was, how many references should you?
Right. Should you consider as just a minimum amount that should appear in a manuscript?
Well, that's a very good question, but a little difficult for me to answer because it really depends on the size of the study and the extent of the study and robustness. I've seen journals, I've seen manuscripts submitted with 5 references. It was a short communication, and then I've seen other manuscripts that have more pages than the actual manuscripts of references. So I really, to be fair to everybody, I can't put a minimum or maximum. What you should do is evaluate your manuscript and determine the appropriate number of references that should be there. I think it's sort of a judgment call. Putting a minimum and maximum is probably not appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Your next question is, I'd like to know your opinion on should the article be rejected if there are statistical flaws?
Yeah, good question, and it depends on the degree of the statistical flaws. Like I said, there was a case where we had a manuscript that was well written, introduction, materials and methods. The problem was they used the wrong statistical analysis, and so what we did was we asked them if they still had the original data and review it. I think it was a repeated measures design, and they didn't evaluate it as repeated measures. So we asked them to go back, and they did, and eventually it was accepted. So if the statistical analysis cannot be redone or is not valid, then that is one of the linchpins of invalidating the data and as such the manuscript.
Great. Your next question, is it possible to challenge a rejection? I have heard that writing subject editors with sufficient justification can result in them reconsidering a submitted manuscript.
Absolutely. The ESA has that option, and we had an experience, I think, last year where authors challenged it. We went back and sent it out again for external review, and the authors were able to clean it up, and in the end it was actually accepted. So yeah, if you can provide justification, and I mean sound justification of why it should not be rejected, that is one of your options.
Great. I'm sure they're glad to hear that. Your next question, what's the criteria that associate editors use for selecting reviewers?
What is the criteria? Well, I think it's, again, most of the journals, and this includes the ESA, have their databases, which they can go ahead and assign people based on a subject category or their expertise. But what eventually happens, and this has happened in my experience, as you review manuscripts for the same journal over and over, then you're on that list. But another way is the subject editor will, or the editor-in-chief will actually go to the references section and look at what the author has cited. And a lot of the times those are experts, and they will actually contact the authors that have been most cited and ask them to review the manuscript.
Great. Is it ever appropriate to enlist a student to help in a review in order to demonstrate to an aspiring scientist how the review process works?
Okay. Great question. But again, it goes back to the confidentiality factor. I think you have to make a judgment call on how well you respect that student. My gut feeling would be no. I think I would use published papers out there to help the student understand the publication process. But it's a judgment call. But remember, the confidentiality is the key to this process, and maintaining the integrity and the reviewer being anonymous.
Okay, great. We have a live question from Elizabeth Bandison. Elizabeth?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You could state the question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, in some cases, a reviewer is given data of research that was done like 3 to 4 years ago. And that data has not been published anywhere else, but it looks like it was done some time back. Is it okay to continue on reviewing, or I don't know if there are any limitations in dealing with such type of data?
You know, I really had trouble hearing the question. I think it sounds like a good one. I really had trouble hearing it.
Okay, what I'm saying is, in some cases, a reviewer is given a research paper of data which was done like 3 to 4 years ago. And I would say it would be like the data was collected a long time ago, and several things might have changed in the process when the writer was writing and submitting the manuscript. So is it okay to accept such type of data, or are there any limitations in how recent the data that somebody publishes, how recent should be the data for someone to be considered in publishing the manuscript?
Okay, I did hear you, and that is a great question, is the age of the data. Well, it really doesn't,
yeah,
it really, I don't think that's, well, if you're trying to publish data from 1971, that could be a problem. But if you're within the last 10 years, I think it's okay to, say you got some data from a study you did in 2005, 2006, and there's been nothing published on it. I think it's valid to develop a manuscript associated with that data.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Your next question, if I reviewed an article and asked for revisions, if later I found that the article was published without making certain changes, what should I do at that time?
Oh, that's, let me reiterate that. You've reviewed a manuscript, you recommended some changes, and you found it published without your changes, but it was published. That has happened to me. I wasn't too happy about it, but there's not much you can do. Once it's published and out there, it's pretty much too late. But let me go back to something that I think is important to help people understand how if they perform a quality review based on this, your review is going to be weighted much heavily than those that are very cursory or very minimal. And I've had instances where I've reviewed a manuscript and the editor sent me the comments from the other reviewers, and the other reviewers were glowing. I found some major problems and it was rejected. So if you can provide a detailed quality review, that'll hold a lot of weight for the subject editor, editor-in-chief, in making the decision. But what that person indicated is not uncommon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your next question, what is
Wow.
the basis for a minimum of 2 to 3 years benchmark for publication of field data?
What's that now?
What is the basis for a minimum of 2 to 3 years benchmark for publication of field data?
Well, because in field data, you have to take into account environmental considerations like temperature, rainfall, light intensity, soil condition, and those can vary from year to year. And if you publish 1 year of field data, how can you make accurate inferences based on that when the environmental conditions, soil conditions, well, can change from year to year? You need to have at least 2 to 3 years, at least in my mindset, to make accurate inferences associated with your study as opposed to just 1 year because of the changes in environmental conditions. And also, if you're doing field study, the pressure from the pest. It can vary in 1 year because of cool temperatures, and the next year it's hot, and so the abundance or the numbers of pests could increase. So you should not, or my opinion is I would not accept papers that have only 1 year field data.
Great. Before I go to the next question, I would like to remind all the ESA members that are on the actual session, this will be an archived webinar available to ESA members, and that is available on the ESA website. So feel free to later share this with some ESA members or non-members so they can see what a great service ESA is providing for the industry. All right, Dr. Cloyd, you have a couple more questions, you have a couple more minutes, and you have a couple of good questions, so I want to get these to you. If you are unsure if a statistical method or research method is inappropriate to answer the research question posed in a manuscript, is it okay to discuss it with a colleague?
That's a good question, and again, it goes back to the confidentiality. I've only done that once in my career because of the confidentiality factor. But if you feel that this colleague has the expertise, what you want to do is just give them the information. Don't give them the authors or anything else, and maybe just in general address the question. Maybe just address it like it's not even from a manuscript and try to get their feedback that way, as opposed to saying, well, what do you think about this in the manuscript? I would generally present it as your own general question and get their feedback that way.
Okay. Your next question. Initially, the manuscript was accepted with a major revision. However, later the subject editor rejected the revised version, indicating that the controls were not sham controls. Is this a valid reason for rejection given that experimental design and statistical analysis were all valid?
That's a good question. That would be something you'd want to take up with the subject editor themselves and get their feedback. Without enough background information, I'm not sure I can provide an accurate recommendation for that question. It's a good one, but it's probably something you're going to have to communicate with the actual subject editor with that journal.
And this is your last question for the webinar. Why are the names of the authors that have submitted the paper visible to the viewers?
Why are the names visible to the subject editor or the reviewers?
To the reviewers.
Oh, okay. That I don't know. In fact, when I review a manuscript, I don't even look at the title of the authors. I go in there kind of blind. That is, that's the format of the ESA, and I think most of the journals out there, they do have the authors on there. So I am not privy to that information, and I really can't address it. But it's a really good question.
Okay, great.
Well, let me go back. I think that one reason they might have that goes back to the conflict of interest. If the reviewer or the individual being requested to borrow in the review knows that one of the authors is a former grad student or a very close co-author, that might lead them to say that they might have a conflict of interest and not review the manuscript.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Cloyd. There were a few questions that we were not able to fit in our time frame, but I will forward those questions to Dr. Cloyd directly, and once he is able to give me responses to those questions, I will send them out electronically to all the attendees so you can have some information on the questions that were posted that we were unable to get to. Again, thank you, Dr. Cloyd, and at this time I will turn it over to Travis Prochaska. Travis?
Thank you.
At this time, I would like to thank Dr. Cloyd and Pamela for their help today, and I'd also like to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. And we look forward to you participating in our next webinar occurring in May on how to write a good scientific paper that by Dr. Thomas Sappington. Some other future topics that will be included in some of our webinar installments include micro and macro photography techniques, writing for a non-scientific audience, and finally, interviewing skills. Once again, I'd like to thank you for participating today, and we hope to see you in May. Thank you.